McKinsey reports that 40% of organizations have already increased AI adoption across multiple business units, reshaping workflows, decisions, and even team structures. But how does it really fit into the human side of transformation?
And by 2030, AI could automate up to 30% of work across most jobs. It's already helping teams plan change, manage resistance, and predict outcomes. But how does it really fit into the human side of transformation?
AI can now write emails, analyze data, and predict how people will respond to change. But here's the real question. Can it feel the impact of change? Can it earn trust? Can it adapt with empathy?
Today, we're diving into how AI is changing the game in change management and where humans still matter most.
Welcome to Reroute Reflections, a podcast about what it really takes to change direction with intention. Around here, we believe change works better when we take the time to reflect and, when necessary, reroute. We're here to challenge assumptions, share stories, and discuss the tools that can help us navigate change with confidence.
Hi,
Hello. Welcome
welcome.
to Season 2, Episode 2.
Episode 2, all about AI.
All about AI. I'm really excited about this episode.
Me too. I think it's a
Because
very hot topic, something that's been coming up, starting to grow the last couple of years. And I think now people are starting to try and figure out in more detail, like where it's going to really impact them in their careers.
it seems like all industries, all fields seem to be impacted some way, shape, or form. Some more than others. Some areas that not too long ago felt super secure
Mm-hmm.
are now being kind of ripe for change, impact. We've seen a lot of layoffs in areas that not too long ago were kind of the area where we felt like was the most secure. Information technology. I remember in university or just shortly thereafter, it was like, what should you do your degree in? It was like IT, you know, become a
Yeah.
software engineer. That's what you should do. That's where the big money is. And now you're seeing layoffs after layoffs for that exact role. And it wasn't that long ago. Even though I'm pretty old, I'm not that old. So it's pretty wild to see how things can turn very quickly. So I know we'll dive into a lot of that today.
Yeah. I think a lot of the industries that are probably more worried are those industries that are more like technology based and maybe rooted in more like technological skills versus like soft skills. So like even me as like a dietitian and like healthcare, like I'm thinking about different soft skills I have in terms of like empathy or communication with people and trying to like figure out what works for them in their like in their personal life or with their culture. And I feel like those are things that maybe AI won't really ever be able to take away from a job like mine, but we've got some interesting things to talk about today, and we'll see, I guess, where it goes, right? We don't know because like you said, those people in IT thought they were so safe before, and now maybe they're not. And I think similarly, you can also relate to the discussions that are happening around AI impacting change management. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. So, discussing AI's role specifically within change management, the opportunities that it's presenting, the challenges that it might bring, and then considering how change management is going to adapt to AI driven transformation across industries. Because AI is going to come into all these fields that you're working with on whatever change management projects they're working through. And so, how do you also pivot your business now to help overcome the fears that they have on top of the fears that you have?
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack, but it's a good thing we've got, at least 40 minutes to dive
Yeah.
into this topic. And I think it's a really good way to segment into our new segment, which is what we're calling Change in the Wild. And so we talked a little bit about, some segment like this in episode 1. So this is what we're going to be, doing. This will either be kind of a case study or an article that's out there that kind of is really relevant to what we're talking about. And so for this segment, we pulled out an article from NBC that was very recent. We were recording this on July 21st. I'm pretty sure this is like either today or yesterday, the article that came out. So it is AI fuels tech job cuts despite efficiency questions among workers. So we'll put a link to the article in the show notes so that you can have a copy and take a where you could read it. It doesn't look like it's behind a paywall, so you should all have access to it. It was a really interesting article. We had a few. I mean, AI. I just feel like ever since we talked about this topic idea for the podcast, it felt like all I saw was articles and webinars kind of posting coming into my inbox about AI, which was great because it made it so much easier to come up with topic or content for this podcast. But in the article itself, it kind of touches on a little bit of a story that we don't necessarily hear or talk about, which is the potential downsides of AI. So in the article, it said that, or it found in a study, that when developers are allowed to use AI tools, they actually take 19% longer to complete tasks or complete issues that the developers have found, which was really interesting because everyone assumed that AI is actually going to increase the efficiency. That's literally, and you can see that a lot of companies like Microsoft, specifically Meta, I believe is another example, that they are cutting a lot of employees, and I'm sure related to the economy and not just about AI. But I'm sure in the back of their mind, they're like, well, we saw some stats around Microsoft. 30% of Microsoft code is now written by AI, and so I'm sure they're thinking, well, if we make these cuts, it will definitely help us manage our expenses a little bit better. And we can kind of do that with the safety, knowing that 30% of our code is actually not written by people; they're written by AI. So the math makes sense, but if it's actually taking 19% longer for work to be done, that is a totally different story and can cause a significant impact to the business if they're not really kind of thinking that the whole way through. Um, it's really a fascinating concept, and it was something that like rang a bell for me, and we were like talking through this a little bit, and I'm like, I've heard this concept before in psychology. This idea of like, and I was like, what is it? And so did a little bit of digging. It is no this kind of, I guess, phenomenon that we're seeing here, where you are literally all signs point to you should see an increase in productivity as a result of this change, and yet the opposite happens, and it's referred to as cognitive offloading. So um, essentially what I think is happening here with the engineers or the developers is when you assume something is supposed to be taking you a certain amount of time or is supposed to take you less time to do, you're kind of like offloading some of the thinking that you would otherwise be responsible to do. And when you do that, the overall task ends up taking longer. So I think what the engineers are essentially doing is they're not thinking all the way through a problem like they used to. Now they're relying on Chat GPT or whatever AI tool that they're using in order to help kind of be the problem solvers. And that is essentially taking them a lot longer to complete the tasks than it would otherwise do. And I can see this happen in a number of different fields, mine included, where I can think of situations where you're leveraging AI to write an email or come up with a change plan, and you don't ask the questions that you used to be asking during interviews or with your colleagues because you assume that AI is going to manage and come up with the right solution, the right answer. And then all of a sudden, you're trying to present the change plan, and there are a ton of revisions that need to happen after the fact. And so, what would have typically maybe taken you, a couple of hours to do after you were talking to people to come draft it, it's actually taking you a lot longer in the long run because you're not having those conversations with people. Now, it's a little bit different because we're talking about technology or coding. It's a complicated problem. There is an obvious solution or a clear solution in the problems that these developers are facing. Whereas with change management, it's not a one size fits all approach. But at the end of the day, I think something similar is kind of going on here. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also think It reminds me of being a dietitian because often it's like complicated situations that you're dealing with because you're dealing with people, right? Not necessarily complex because there are like a set number of solutions that you can provide to someone from like a nutrition lifestyle perspective. But I was just thinking about how it might seem easy at first to just put something in a chat GPT, tell them like a bunch of random symptoms you're having. Here was my lab results from my doctor. Like, what kind of nutrition plan should I follow? But I think, like you said, with the technology aspect, like you're not necessarily giving it all the right information now to get the value that you would have normally seen from a dietitian. So even like during an initial nutrition assessment with a dietitian, or at least the way I do it, I have a set number of like questions or material that I would go through with a person to make sure I'm covering different bases to find out if there are root causes of things or if there are flags we need to keep an eye out for. And it's up to me as like that individual who's helping that other person to make sure I'm looking for different things and not just like glazing through it. And I think that's going to be the difference between working with a person versus working with AI is you might think you're getting this like individual nutrition plan that's going to help you with whatever you're dealing with, but if you're not asking it the right questions and you're not providing it with the right data, it can still lead you astray. So,
Yeah, and if you rely not even just on the input of the information, but if you rely too much on the output,
mm-hmm.
right, that can have consequences as well. That, I mean, listen, everyone who uses AI, you can fall into that trap pretty easily of like you're really busy, you're back to back, somebody's asking you for something. And in the work that I do, there's sometimes where I'll use AI to kind of help figure out how, like, give me some ideas on how to answer a question and use that as a way to like formulate my thinking versus just staring at a blank page, so just trying to help figure out how to structure certain things. But I can definitely see situations where you're typing something into ChatGPT, copy and paste it just as is, and it doesn't make any sense, right? And I think that's really important to remember is like the at the end of the day, the output that you get from ChatGPT should never be the final version of what it is you share broadly, right? it's
Mm-hmm.
it's really more of an advisor than it is like a replacement of anything really. And I
Yeah.
think that's where Microsoft and you know might fall into the problem of assuming that it's going to be able to replace fully what these developers were doing. And I don't think that's the case. I think a lot of the times, and you see this a lot of the times with any type of efficiency type of play with organizations, they tend to get into this, um, they make this mistake of saying, well, an individual was doing this activity 5% of their time. We have 100 people doing this activity. As a result of this change, if we have 100 people doing something that's taking 5%, we can actually reduce the workforce by 5 people. It's not actually true because at the end of the day,
Right.
that was only 5% of their time. And so you can't really take out 5% of 100 people's time and take then just 5 people out and just replace it that way. Can you realize the benefits of 5 people? Yes, you can from that. But people, like organizations, tend to miss what you need to do in order to do that effectively. And that would require a complete change in everyone's job description and roles and responsibilities so that you can really capitalize on that 5%. And I just don't feel like that ever tends to happen. It's just we're gonna introduce AI. This tool is supposed to drive this efficiency. Multiply that by how many people or how long people spend on this task, and big bippity boppity boop. There you go. There's your savings, and that's not how it works. There needs to
Yeah.
be a lot of work that goes involved into that, and I think that's the element that I want to talk more about is the idea of change management as it relates to AI. I think AI right now is being treated as a technical solution. It's
Mm.
just like introducing a new software. And even still, even when you do that, it's like there is still elements of change management, but they're looking at it like you're introducing Canva, you know, into people's like toolbox in an organization. Instead, they're not necessarily seeing it as a full transformation, because it is a full transformation that's happening when you're introducing AI into the workforce. Especially when you're talking about savings or like people savings, where you're thinking about we're going to actually cut people as a result of this. I think it's so early, you know, and I remember talking a little bit about AI and what the trend is going to look like for 2025 as it relates to AI. I had put together an article just talking about some of the trends for 2025, and AI for me, I feel like this is the year where people are going to make mistakes. Is kind of essentially what I said was, I think last year everyone was really interested in this new shiny tool, this new shiny like toy that everyone can play with, which is AI. They're trying to figure out how to use it. A lot of people finding benefits and how to do it or how to use it personally for themselves. Now businesses are starting to get onto the bandwagon, really trying to find ways to save, especially in this economic environment that they're in. They're desperate to find ways to cut costs, and AI is definitely providing them that opportunity. But I believe that they're going to miss out on the complexity around AI implementation, which is you're introducing a tool that people are scared of, right? You're introducing a
Mm-hmm.
tool that, you know, people feel like they are it is going to replace my job. In a lot of cases, it is true. That is exactly what's going to happen. Um, but I don't think it is it is like that thing to replace people's jobs just yet. I think it's a tool to help elevate people, and to avoid them from having to do some of the mundane, basic, run of the mill administrative tasks that was taking up a ton of their time. They can streamline a lot of that work. And then that allows them to elevate their role and focus on the higher value activities.
If so I feel like I have a good example that popped in my head as you were talking actually, and it's actually
Hmm.
around Instagram. I think people are kind of picturing AI like this new app that's going to immediately create and replace jobs. But if we think back to when Instagram first came out, what 2011, 2010, 2012, somewhere around there when Instagram first happened, we were all posting what we ate for dinner and this is my coffee, I'm going on a walk. Like it was literally just like an instant moment in time. We're posting random pictures just to connect with other people. Fast forward to what Instagram is today, where it's literally a career for people. Like people are full time making posts on Instagram, making money, doing brand deals. If you had said that to us back when Instagram first came out, we would have been like, you're crazy. Like, there's no way an app can replace a job. And I
Right.
think the trap that we're now falling into with things like AI is immediately thinking this is going to replace a job or this is going to be a career for somebody. Or I guess in this case, like AI is going to be the new employee that we have on board. But I think to your point, like it's so early. We don't really know what the full capacity is of AI yet. We don't know how it's going to impact those people, those organizations, and to fully just start making lots of cuts to different jobs and have it in the back of your mind. Oh, if we just implement some more AI, it's going to make up for the losses that we have. I
Mhm.
think just isn't realistic. I think it's too early. There's
Mhm.
ways that we can implement AI to help us become more efficient, but I think it's too soon to say it's fully going to replace a person.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'll give an example from a client that I worked for in the past is very similar and really showcases the detriment of moving too quickly with new technology. It was for a financial services company, and we were introducing digital and digital banking and all of those types of benefits that come from that. With digital banking platforms, you obviously or naturally think similar to how with AI and coders, you think you're going to need less coders or developers. Similar with banking, the feeling was you're gonna need less tellers, you're gonna need less CSRs, and as a result of the integration, one of the ways to fund the digital banking platform that we launched was to reduce the sales force of the CSRs or the tellers as a result of that. So I think we cut, I can't remember how many we cut, but we cut a significant chunk of the workforce as a result. I think it made the news to a point. And so
Oh my
we
God.
cut that. And then I think it was 8 months later, we had to hire them back because we realized we cut too far. The things that we thought that we would realize in terms of the savings were never realized in actuality, you know? And it's back to my earlier point around like, you can't be, you can't be, you say you're going to cut off like say 5% of somebody's job. Like, well, you can't take somebody's finger or toes. You can't cut a finger and toe off of a person, right? To be able to like say this is how you make it up. It's you can't like, add 5%, multiply that by, what is it, 20, and then that like 20 people, and then all of a sudden say like, oh, I'm going to cut like one person. You got one person doing this 5% activity across 20 different locations. Like, how do you cut one person out? Like, you take one person out of the 20, that one location is just not going to have that activity being done. And so in isolation, you can't make a decision because of one thing. You need to like look
Mhm.
at it holistically and say, okay, well, if we're going to cut out, 5% of this activity because of this new technology, well, let's take out that 5%, right? And let's look at like, what does that activity do? So if we think about it from the banking example, it's like, okay, well, if we take out the transactional elements and we have all we push that off to the customer. Okay, well, how long is that actually going to take? We take things like bill payments, and we take things away like transfers and all Mastercard payments, all of those types of things, or credit card payments. You take all that away, if you were to say, "Hey, customer, you can't go to the branch and or the bank and do any of those transactions anymore," then you might have something. But that's not what you do, right? You say, "We're going to take that. We're going to give people the opportunity to do it on their own and not go into the branch. But if they do come into the branch, we're still going to give it to them." So now you're dependent on the customer's adoption, and that was the piece that was sticky. And of course, this was pre-COVID, and so COVID, was the stick that hit everybody to say, okay, well, you can't go into the branch now. So when you can't go into the branch, that's when you realize the savings because now nobody could do it. And
Mhm.
you're like, well, this person that was doing this 100% of their time is no longer required. That's when you can actually realize the savings. But you have to think about it beyond just that one person. It's like, well, if this person's not doing X, then what other roles were impacted because of that? What was the branch manager having to coach that individual on this activity? How much time did that person spend? And so on and so forth. Now, I still don't believe that you can cut people as a result of this one thing. I think the more obvious play is elevate. You take the small time that you're saving, right? And you take that away, but you adjust their roles and responsibilities and elevate what they do. So now they're not doing the mundane stuff, but now they can do more senior things. But people think it can happen like in an instant, and that's not true at all, right? Because you've got to train them on how to do something differently. They now have to have experience in doing that, and maybe it changes your overall talent strategy, right? Because you were hiring for this person to do X, now they're doing Y. The individuals who are doing X right now may not be capable of doing Y, and you need to figure out like, does that mean we need to upskill them, and maybe some of them can get upskilled to do it. Maybe they can't. We need to hire new people. That's like going to take you at least a year to like get these people in. And so, these things that are happening, just like, oh, we introduced this tool, let's just get cut, 50% of our workforce, as a result of that, because this is what, we can do. That's what the numbers are telling us to do. It's ridiculous.
Well,
And
and I feel like we're all scarred from like after COVID, or like maybe not scarred, but like, we have this different view on how things can change very quickly. Because similarly to like you said, even from the employee perspective and the employer perspective, once COVID hit and we all had to go online, it had to happen within like a few days, right? To keep
yeah,
businesses running, keep things going. But we did have a really rough time with that where people weren't sure how to even use like Zoom or Teams or whatever was available. And it was a very rough, like, little while, rough few months. I think it even took some people like upwards of a year probably to get used to that change. And then looking back on it now, I think a lot of us are like, oh wow, like that change did happen so quickly. We were told for so long, no, you can't work from home. This is a job that has to be 100% in person. But in fact, when it came down to it, we managed to pivot and actually work 100% at home. So I think we're of
Yeah.
the opinion now in today's society that like changes can happen that quickly and we'll just like get over it. But I think what you're also trying to say from a change management perspective is like there's a right way to go about this so that it doesn't hurt so much next time. And I think it's taking those people into consideration, right?
Yeah, and I think it's just a lack of understanding, from a corporate leader perspective, just in general when it comes to. And listen, everyone has their own desires, their own motivations around why they need to do certain things. Senior leaders are getting pressures from, executive leaders. Executive leaders are getting pressure from the CEO. The CEO is getting pressure from the board. The board is getting pressure from shareholders. Like it's a never-ending cycle. So at the end of the day, everyone's getting pressure to do things and to do things quickly, especially if you're a public company, which is primarily who I work with. I do work for non-for-profits. It's a very different environment because of that. There is definitely, you see the difference between a for-profit company and a not-for-profit in terms of the desire to get things right. It doesn't matter how long it necessarily takes from a nonprofit perspective, but you're dealing with a finite amount of funds. And so the focus there is to get it right, not to get it done quickly. And with a large corporation, it's completely different. There's a lot of money available. You want to do things quickly. You want to fail fast, right? Like that is the goal. And so you want to do things quickly. The idea of having to hire new people after if you mess up is not as big of a risk as to not do something in the first place. And I understand that. It totally makes sense. The example that you share around COVID is a perfect example because there's one element that existed within COVID that doesn't exist with AI right now, and that is the collective, the collective pursuit of a goal or the collective understanding of the sense of urgency. Right? When you have that sense of urgency, which is a John Cotter concept when it comes to managing change. The sense of urgency, that burning platform that we talked about in episode one a little bit, is there is a global pandemic. We, we can't go outside and breathe on anybody, which we did way more often than we ever should have, in my opinion. And so we need to figure out a way to do things. Leaders, governments are telling us we can't go, and see our families, and we can't go out to movie theaters, we can't go to gyms, we can't go to any of these things. So there is that pressure that's been put onto us to say we can't do all of these different things. And so when a company now says, hey, you can't go into the branch to do your banking, you have to do it all online. Well, everyone's like, that totally makes sense. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense to me. But if you imagine telling customers to do that before COVID or even now, like 6 years, 5 years after COVID, there would be a revolt, right?
Yeah. Like
Um,
just because the bank wants to save some money and cut a few people.
yeah, they're like, "Are you
Yeah.
kidding me? You make enough money. Like,
Yeah.
no, thank you." And yet, these are the same customers that have shares in the banks and want them to increase. So, yeah, we
Mm-hmm.
all we understand the irony of the whole thing, but there's that sense of urgency to be like, "Yeah, 100%. Let's all rally behind this." Right? A perfect example. This actually came off of LinkedIn, which was really funny, very recent, and I think a lot of people can relate to this as well as the COVID one, but this one in particular. And it just illustrates this sense of urgency. And if I remember, I'll put it in the show notes because it was somebody who is a coach, leadership coach. I've met her a couple of times, Nicole, and she put this in as her experience when she was on a flight. So they've been delayed. I think it was like 4 or 5 hours on this flight, and finally they come on and they announce to say, "Hey, listen, um, we have fixed the problem. We're ready to go, but the problem is there's a shift change, like um, the air, the what is it, travel attendants? What do they call them?
The flight
The
attendants?
flight attendants, travel attendants, air
That's
attendants.
close. Yeah.
It's pretty close. Yeah. I was like, this can't be right. So they're saying that there's a mandatory shift change that needs to happen, I guess, because of the amount of time that they have been working. And so it's coming up. So unless we board this plane in the next 10 minutes, every single person on this plane boards in 10 minutes, they're going to max out and they're not going to be able to. So we're going to have to wait until the next shift starts, which is, next day. And you wouldn't believe how fast everyone moved, not in a chaos, but in ordered fashion. Flight attendants were telling them, I need you to go here, go here. All right, you make sure you get your passport out. None of this, messing around. Everyone's ready to go. They were like phone or passport ticket, putting the things in. Everyone, get your seatbelts on, blah, 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 done. 10 minutes, everyone boarded. You know how long that
Wow.
takes usually? It takes like an hour at
Like,
least,
yeah.
hour and a half. Someone's complaining about, can I get the peanuts early? It's like, what about, I kind of want to drink, there's
There's
somebody
always someone who
rowdy.
boards last, like at the last minute because they're like calling
Yeah.
them in the airport, like you're due for your gate.
Yeah.
Not
It's
in this
like,
instance.
you get up to the front and they're like, don't have their passport or their ticket ready and, all of these different things, right? But 10 minutes. It's amazing what can happen when you got that sense of urgency, right? And
Yeah.
people are all, aligned on that one goal. And that's exactly what Nicole was sharing when she shared this post. And I just thought about it. I'm like, yeah, like it would be great to have, that sense of urgency, that alignment. But you sometimes can't have, like when we're talking about AI, right? There is no sense of urgency, you know? If anything, the employees are actively going to try to fight that sense of urgency because there's like nothing really in it for them, At
Hmm.
the end of the day, it's like, well, I'm going to lose a job if I like play with game, or I decide to like adopt this, effectively. So you can still get the sense of urgency that you need to like have everyone, move together with you and not against you in this change, but you need to think about it holistically. AI integration, implementation rather, or integration. I think integration is probably a really good term for it. Like if we think of AI as like a strategic partner, you can almost think about it as like you would as like acquiring a company, right? And the work
Hmm.
that you do to like adjust culture and to make sure that there is that, cohesive integration. And yes, during an acquisition, there are synergies. People do lose their jobs at the end of the day, but um, the goal is to try to integrate the best of both worlds. That's always the goal, and that's essentially what we need to think about. But they're not treating AI and implementation as an acquisition. They're treating it as, hey, we're introducing this new fancy tool like Canva or Microsoft Office. Here you go, and they're ignoring all of the other elements. And I think to their detriment, I think they think it's easy. They think people can figure it out because AI is so streamlined and intuitive, but it's not easy and you're also dealing with people that don't want to learn it, right? Like there is no
Hmm.
motivation to learn it. So if you frame it as this is part of our journey to get us here, reassure employees that they're safe because this is part of your journey, this is where you sit in the future, you'll have way more people coming with you for that change than you do right now. Because all they're seeing is on the news, like AI gets introduced, people lose their jobs. If I'm a software engineer, and I hear AI is coming in or has been coming, I'm pretty sure I don't feel really great about AI, So how involved am I going to be in helping support the organization through this integration? Probably not a lot, right?
Yep. I feel like this ties really well into our next segment, actually called Change Mail, where we have a question that I feel like is kind of touching on everything you're talking about already. So, why don't we dive into that? So it says, Hey, Andrew and Becca, I'm trying to roll out an AI tool at work, but I'm running into a lot of resistance from my team. Some people are excited, and others are really nervous about how it'll affect their roles. A few are worried that AI might replace them or that they won't be able to keep up with the tech. I'm finding it hard to balance the potential benefits with those fears around job security and skill gaps. Any tips on how to bring everyone along? So, as a change manager, how do you think you would approach this sort of situation?
Yeah, the interesting thing is I approach it a lot. like I do with an acquisition. Now that we're talking about it, I honestly see so many similarities between the two. I think the first step is to really understand like who your stakeholders are. Who's going to be impacted by this change. And it looks like this person has kind of already started to do that. They have a good sense of who's nervous about it. They're starting to get that sentiment already, which is really great. But I think understanding who exactly your stakeholders are, who's going to be impacted directly by this, people whose jobs are literally going to be now leveraging AI either partly or fully. And then what are the downstream implications and who's going to be affected by that? I think it's really important to map those things out. And then for each of those individuals, trying to understand, okay, what are the impacts associated with this change? What are the upsides? What are the downsides for each of them? Are they going to perceive this as a positive, a negative, and kind of getting that blueprint out to say, okay, well, when we implement this change, this is how people's roles, perceptions are likely going to be. Talking to people to get that understanding is going to be key. Introducing what this change is likely going to do, and then kind of pitching that to them to kind of get a sense of like what their overall perception is. Obviously, not trying to kind of come up with it yourself is important. So gathering that sentiment, and then you essentially get a list of like, here are all the impacts associated with this change, and it's holistic, right? You're not just looking at it from one lens. And you can then try to figure out, how do I mitigate some of these gaps? This could be something that, if people are worried and nervous, like they say, this might be something as simple as like actually getting out a roadmap around, this is what the future state looks like. Here are the phases for us to get us there. Here's where we are today. And here's what you can expect, right? And then just making sure that leaders are along the journey with you so that they can start to communicate to their employees about what the truth is, but also sharing with you what the sentiment appears to be over time. Like, you want to see that sentiment shift from like the nervous, anxious to, more collaboration, excitement around the possibilities that AI can bring. Like, at the end of the day, every employee should want to see their company succeed, because if their company succeeds and grows, that just means more opportunity for them in the long run. To if they expand into new markets, there's new leadership positions that open up, there's new projects that come available. And so focusing on the positives outside of just like, oh, you get this AI tool, it's going to make your work easier. Like, go beyond that. Like, let's look at what else is there, broader, like bigger picture for the organization, for your role, for your development. And starting to kind of see the holistic change, I think is really, really important, especially for AI. And it's really new. Like, I can't fault too many folks for how they're managing the AI changes. It's such a new, novel concept. This idea of like a technology change being so fundamentally affecting the organization as a whole, even culture. You don't really see a lot of that, and so this is kind of new ground. But I think trying to figure out all the nuances that make up this change that go beyond just the technical change itself is your first step.
Mm-hmm. And I think similarly to like what you spoke about before, where I think what people are most afraid of right now is that they've heard like the whole thing about 5% of your workday could be done by AI. So at the end of the day, they believe like the organization's going to cut X number of people now to try and save that 5% across the board. But I think as a change manager going in, if you're able to start to get them to understand that that's not how it really is going to work the best at the end of the day, and that yes, you can start to save time with a bunch of employees across the board in terms of something AI could do, but that doesn't mean cutting people. It means like finding new things to give them, or finding those like different opportunities within the organization to maybe promote a few people and then replace a chunk with I think will also help overcome that fear that employees have, because right now they're just seeing like the employers and the organizations say, we could save time with AI, let's like just cut a bunch of people without even thinking it through.
Mhm.
So I think they'll come around, but It's gonna take
Yeah,
some time and some effort.
yeah. I mean, this. I mean, it's tough. It's a tough challenge because at the end of the day, the attractiveness of AI is not in the ability to drive revenue, right? It's in the
Yeah.
ability to cut cost, right? Like, because and that's the environment that we're in, where it's trying to reduce costs as much as possible because that's really where companies have control, right? Being able to drive revenue up is a variable. It's depends on market conditions, depends on your salespeople's effectiveness, all of that type of stuff. Whereas a cut cost, is easy. You get rid of, not easy, but it's like it seems easier, right? It's like,
Hmm.
oh, if we need to save, $100,000, just cut one person, boom, done. But you don't think about like what does that happen? What happens to the overall business when you do that, right? And I'm not saying that AI won't lead to efficiencies that will generate, a reduced sales force. I just don't think we are there yet to figure out what that is. And I think companies are moving way too quickly before they're understanding the impacts. And maybe they do understand the impacts and they just need to cut, quickly because they need to cut quickly.
Yeah.
But I just don't think that's the right strategy. And I think, these companies are going to feel it relatively soon, and I think we've already started to see some of those examples where they're already starting to feel it. And it's really only like year two, it's
Yeah.
pretty new,
Really,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
Um, but no,
So I
really
guess
great.
I guess the next thing maybe we can talk about, we've talked a lot about how change is really going to impact yourself as a change manager and like the employees and kind of perspectives. But if we're to dive more into like our change toolkit now, for you as a change manager, like how will you specifically use AI to start to leverage it yourself and to find some efficiencies in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, like I mean, I think everyone who knows me knows that I use AI as often as I can. I really do use AI as a strategic partner. I think I focus a lot less, just in general, on trying to have the answers for everything. It's definitely been tough to learn that over time, but especially with AI, I think that really makes it easier to do now. This idea of like you don't need to have the answers for everything. AI can really help you with getting those answers. It's about, the prompts. It's about asking the right question. And it's about the follow-up question and the follow-up question after that to really get to the heart of what it is that you're trying to solve. I mean, the way I use AI in practice is for a couple of ways. But for example, let's say I have an impact that let's use a real example. I let's say I have, an impact as a result of an acquisition. Let's say there's a change in benefits that are happening between the organization that for the company that's been acquired and they're moving into the new company. The new company has a different benefits program and there's a change associated with that. As the work that I'm doing managing that change, I need to think about, okay, um, given the change that is going to happen within the benefits program that I know about, what are the different things that I should keep top of mind as it relates to, how employees, what information employees may need to have as part of, the communications that go out around the benefit plans. And so I can leverage AI to help provide kind of a list of, what those potential impacts are, which I can then validate with folks that are from the business when I'm asking the question. So I use it a lot to, prep for conversations that I'm having with individuals. I basically will, before I have conversations with the stakeholders, get a sense of like, here's a persona of the stakeholder, chat GPT or whatever. This is the change that they're dealing with. What are some of the questions you think they'll have that they'll want answered? And I validate that with the actual human being.
Mm-hmm.
And so
The most important
it's
part.
Yeah, and so it really it helps me to just like start things off, right? And then you're having a conversation with the person and things come up from there, but it's a really great starting point, you know. If I'm writing a communication, similar way, I know who the stakeholders are. I know what the problem is. It helps. I'm like, what's an outline of the key talking points I should look to try to jab here or to try to hit home here. And so I'll use AI to help me figure out, you know, what that outlines is, and I can take it from there. Or vice versa. You know, I might come up with the idea and then say, all right, this is what I've come up with. Am I missing anything? You know, and so I really use it to help, you know, offer suggestions, help prepare for conversations with people. I haven't used this actually myself, but I really should. Mainly because I don't have Copilot, and I am a Microsoft Office organization, and so are a lot of my clients. But I don't have Copilot, so I've seen people take notes with it. And actually, somebody I work with right now just got access to Copilot and has been sending me like things you can do with that. You know, there was a question that I had around, oh, I heard this person say something about this, like, but I think it was months ago. I can't remember. You know, she just went into Copilot and said, like, hey, can you like go through my meeting transcripts and like, you know, basically tell me, you know, if this person said this. And it was
What?
like, boom, like came up saying, like, yeah, on, you know, I'm making this up, like January 3rd, you know, Timmy said blah, blah, blah during the meeting. And you're
Wow.
like, what? It's crazy, right? It's so good. Obviously, you need to have transcript on, you know, in order for it to do things like that. But like, it seems more and more common that you're seeing that. And so you know, and before it would have been like, okay, I gotta go listen to like, you know, 100 meetings that I was on with this person, figure out like what this person said, you know, hours and hours. And now it's just like, boom, a second, right? I'm not
Yeah.
saying that we can cut, you know, 100 people because of that feature. I'm
Yeah.
just saying in this one instance, one time, um,
Hmm.
that it saved hours. Okay, relax, everybody. CEOs are like, oh, okay, look, 100%, it's definitely 100% time. 500 people, we can definitely save for
Cut
sure.
them all out now. Yep.
I'm not saying that, but no, I'm just kidding. So those are the ways I use it. But you know,
I I think what's important with like kind of the summary I got from what you were talking about too is like being able to know like the right prompts to provide to AI to get you like that valuable information and give you a good like foundation to start from. And I think even creating those personas for ChatGPT or for AI before you even ask the question so that it's got some more like context to go off of is important because I do think that's part of the reason why people are still so unsure of AI because maybe they've tried using it once or twice and they just pop in a random question and they're like, oh, that's not really what I was looking for. And that seems really generic. Like, it's not very useful. So, yeah, I guess how did you figure out, like, how to be so specific, what kind of prompts to use? You have resources you could share with the audience.
yeah, I've pulled together kind of a list of like prompts that I've used for certain elements, whether it, you know, for certain situations. You know, at the end of the day, I think I always try to focus on like I'm always going to prompt them like 3 or 4 times
Hmm.
before I use whatever output it is, because you know, at the end of the day, like I'm not uploading like documents, you know, from companies or clients, right? I'm keeping things very general, and I'm not using names or anything like that. So I'm keeping it super generic. So, you know, like AI is smart, but it's not that smart, right? It's not in
Yeah.
every meeting with me to be able to figure out the context. And so there is that additional effort that you need to put in order to like give it enough context while also keeping it general enough so that you're not, you know, from an information security standpoint, you're not sharing information that's pertinent to the company. So, I mean, for me, it takes a couple of times where you're just like, all right, this doesn't make any sense. That's not what I meant. Like this, I find personas really help, you know, painting a picture of the individuals, the stakeholders, you know, really help. And you just kind of play with it. You know, obviously, if you if you're with a company or you're using an AI tool, I think Claude is a tool that's relatively like it's used more frequently. I find Copilot as well, like leverages your organizational information, so you can actually use or add documents to it. So if you're using that, it's a lot easier for the output to be more bang on earlier. But to be honest, I sometimes even find that when I'm asking the questions to chat, it's like helping me refine my ideas too. Or like it will pop up something that's kind of ridiculous, but sometimes it will just jog my memory, and I'll just be like, oh, well, what about this that I'd never really thought of. So it's like you're literally having a conversation with somebody, as crazy as that sounds, and it's helping refine your thinking along the way as well. One of the things that I will do for the next newsletter, I guess. So for the August newsletter, in that we're going to put together kind of a cheat sheet almost for AI and how like I use it, and some of the tips and tricks that I have over. I was a very early adopter to AI. I started using it almost immediately after it launched, and now I use it every chance I get. Not just ChatGPT, but I've used Scribe before. Oh my god, there's so many tools. I actually have a folder full of like the tools. I've used Tome before, DeepL, Sora, which is like a chat GPT, Scribe. I've used so many different tools that are out there. Copilot I've never used, surprisingly. But I mean I've used the free version of it, so it's very chat GPT esque. I've never used some of the other AI tools that are pretty popular aside from like Copilot. There's also, what's the name of, oh, Synthesia is one of them. That's for like putting together learning content or training material. I've heard great things about it though. But like the AI kind of like meeting assistant apps. So I think there's like Fireflies is one. There's also ones that you can have as part of like your meetings, and it will take notes. Copilot does the same thing. I've never used any of those, but I've heard those are really great. To be honest, I'm still manual when it comes to note taking, which kind of drives me kind of a little crazy and takes up a lot of my time. But again, I kind of like that because it organizes my thought in a very like creative way that helps me to just generate different ideas. So I don't know if I ever would use Copilot for that. Just personally for me, I like the idea of like handwriting the notes and going off on tangents is kind of just how my brain works. So, but there's just so many tools out there, and I just if I could find a way to reduce the administrative burden on some of the tasks and focus again on elevating the work that I do for clients, I think I have an ethical responsibility to do that, try to streamline the amount of time that I spend. They're hiring me for my expertise. They're not hiring me because, for to do, administrative work on their behalf. I want to, provide them as much expert advice that I can rather than, billing them for, mundane admin style tasks. And that's where I see the benefit of ChatGPT and other AI tools being able to do that. Like take out like the noise, the time it's taking me to like, stare at a blank piece of paper, right, for
Mhm.
an hour, and let's reduce that down to maybe 15 minutes. And I think that helps everybody.
Totally. And so I guess talking of resources or tools as well, any change shelf recommendations that you have for this week? I don't know if it'd be like AI related or any books that you just might recommend to open the perspective about AI.
Definitely. I think for our change self recommendation for episode 2, it's not an AI book, but I think it will really help explain this concept around where AI fits in the workplace, especially. And it's a book by um, it's a book by Rick Nason. I was gonna say my friend Rick Nason. I don't know if he sees me as a friend. I hope he does, because he's an individual who I admire a lot. He was a professor of mine at Dalhousie University when I was doing my business degree there, and so he wrote this book. It's not complicated, and it's a book that when I read it changed my whole perspective on change management and what I was missing. Really, it was a key book for me, and it had nothing to do with change management. It had everything to do with risk management. But the concepts that he introduces in this book around complexity and how anytime you're dealing with people, it's a complex problem, and we try so desperately to. And he refers to it in risk, but change management is the same because at the end of the day, they're both dealing with people. They try to fit people into frameworks and say, we're going to follow this framework. And if we follow this framework, you know, the outcome is going to be the same all the time, successful change in our case. And that's not true because we're dealing with people. And I think that what's the phrase, if you ever want to see God laugh, like show him your plan. That should
Oh
literally
yeah.
just be like, if you want to see a person laugh or a change manager laugh, just show the people the plan or try to implement a plan. Or that's not funny at all, but whatever. You get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Implement
I
like a
think,
really rigid framework, and your change
yeah,
manager should laugh at you because it's not going to
yeah,
happen like that.
yeah, or exactly. Like, it's just like, this will do it. And so I think that's kind of the element of, or what I take away from Rick's book is trying to help us understand this idea of complicated versus complex and why frameworks only work for some complicated problems, which essentially have a solution,
Hmm.
a firm solution. Think about a math problem. There's only one answer, to this problem, and in those cases, frameworks work very well to make sure you've got the right structure. Think like scientific method and introduce experiments and stuff like that,
Hmm.
or not experiments rather, but math problems or coding is a great example of that. Where it's a complicated solution. There is an answer. There's one answer to it, and that's where I feel like AI is primed to help support, if not replace. Is this how do you get how do you solve these complicated problems? Where I
Yeah.
think it's going to falter is the complex one, like risk management, change management, anything that involves people. That's where I feel like AI cannot kind of replace. And even because I don't want to like fault on developers, like there is complex elements to what coders do because what they're doing is they're trying to draft a code based on how people will behave. It's like, well, this application needs to do X when a person does Y. And so this element of like trying to anticipate what a person is going to do, there's that complexity. And so that's where I feel like we're, maybe not to say the folks at Microsoft may be missing this because obviously they're way smarter than me, but um, you know, sometimes it's hard to see it that every problem when it deals with people has a complex element. And so the idea of saying, well, we can cut these developers because AI is going to do it, I think it's only going to solve the complicated part of the problem, the actual code itself. But to figure out what the code needs to have, that's the piece where AI is just not ready to do it yet. Maybe down the
Yeah.
road, who knows?
Yeah.
I
And I
hope
think
not,
that's
because
where
then
it,
I'd be out of a job.
yeah. I think that's where it even comes like full circle with our episode today, where we opened talking about that article that has to do with the developers being 19% less productive when using AI. And I think that's like the perfect way to kind of think about it is that AI is coming in to deal with complicated coding and helping to support with that. But what they don't realize is happening is that now the coders aren't fully invested in whatever code was written by AI. And when they're having to deal with the more complex solutions or more complex problems that are coming up because of how people are dealing with it or how people are trying to interface with it, now it's taking them extra time to have to go back and figure out what was the code that was written, why was this, and trying to figure that all out too. So I think
Oh yeah,
having like
that's a
a
great
book
point.
recommendation that's going to be across industries is like so applicable to everyone. Whether you're in change management, risk management, healthcare, I think that could be a great book to read into.
100%. I think every job deals with people, even the ones you think don't. And when people are involved, it's not a simple solution. It's not a complicated solution. There's always an element of complexity and understanding that, especially with AI, being so interwoven into everything that we do, I think is important because you need to understand its limitations. It's not the saving grace. It's not the, the Trinity or the Holy Trinity or whatever. It's not going to solve all of your problems. Is basically what I'm trying to
Hmm.
say. It's like at the end of the day that it has its limitations, and I do think that we. It's not that we don't know it has limitations. I think we know it. We just don't necessarily understand what it is. Like, right? And
Right.
I don't know if that's a fair statement, but I just don't think we understand what its limitations are right now. We're still trying to figure it out. I think right now the perceiving or the prevailing assumption is that it can do anything that we ask it to do. And I think
Right.
that's where I think we need to understand that where its limitations are. And I think Rick's book, which was written years ago, and maybe I'll see if we can get him on this podcast. Maybe Rick, if you're listening, I might be reaching out to you for
Yeah.
you to be on this podcast. Maybe we can dive a little bit more into this topic. Um, but yeah, I think it's definitely a timely read. And yeah, I can't recommend it enough.
Amazing. So before we wrap up for the day, last episode you got to ask me the question. This episode I get to ask you the question. Can you reflect on the last time that you had to reroute?
It's funny. I didn't even prepare for this.
I know.
But I am rerouting. In terms of I think you said water, right? Drinking more water.
Yep.
Mine is also a nutrition, but also a health thing. So I am now. I've been doing. I've been working out quite a bit as much as I can, but I've got a new plan now. I'm working with a trainer, and we just started today. So
Nice.
week one of my 4 week plan, at least for now, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But I am very committed to rerouting my approach to you know fitness, starting to eat right. I think that's mainly my issue. Probably won't can't believe it when you see me, but I do have a problem with not eating enough, and so I need to do a little bit of a better job of eating more consistently, especially breakfast. I need to drink more water, but I also need to just also like when I'm working out, but I also need to like, I'm just kind of there just doing random stuff, things that I used to do when I was in high school. And so I think now I need to get a little bit more structure in my life and figuring out what exactly do I want to do in order to achieve the goals that I want to achieve in terms of my fitness goals. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, that is something that I'm rerouting. And it's funny because I was having a conversation with my trainer today, and the element of like, hey, what do you do for a living? What do you do every day? And I was like, I do what you do, man. I do basically the
Yeah.
same thing you do. You're trying to change, this lazy slob to not this lazy guy to change his habits. I basically do the same thing in an organizational setting. I try to, change the way people are doing certain things from one thing to another in a way that is manageable and the least amount of resistance, unnecessary resistance, because resistance is good. It just means that you maybe miss something, but unnecessary, unwarranted resistance because you didn't do it, you didn't manage to change effectively.
Hmm.
I basically do the same thing as you, man, and it made me think like maybe I should have him on the podcast one day. I think
I mean, yeah.
uh yeah, and,
We had
and I just
mentioned
think about it
personal
too.
trainers in our first
It's true.
episode of people dealing with change, so you never know.
It's true. I mean, he gave me a questionnaire. I answered the questionnaire. We had a conversation, like a one-on-one conversation, hour-long conversation around my goals and what I wanted to achieve. And I was like, man, this seems like a stakeholder interview. And he sends me a questionnaire. I'm like, I've totally done this before. And then he puts
Hmm.
together a plan, a fitness plan. I put together change plans. He sent me a ton of communications. It's literally the exact same thing. We do the exact same job.
Hmm.
And so, I think it just made me realize that the season where we're really trying to like talk about this idea of like breaking down the silos of change management and knowing that change management doesn't just happen in organizations, it happens everywhere. And what we can learn from other industry professionals like yourself as a dietitian, my trainer in personal training, and I'm sure a ton of others out there, anyone that deals with people really, I think will just make us all better. And so, yeah, it's that's what I'm rerouting. I'm rerouting my fitness life. Yeah, so I'll keep you all posted on how that goes.
Yeah. One
But
step at a
yeah,
time. One step at a time.
one step at a time, and I'm already sore from the workout
Yeah.
this afternoon. So I guess it worked.
Yeah. Well, if anyone in the audience has a reroute story of their own or a challenge that you need help with, please send it to us and we might feature it in a future episode, just like we had our discussion today around questions and problems that came in. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and follow on our social media. Sign up for the newsletter so you can get some of those prompts in the next edition. And if you found this helpful or inspiring at all, please share the episode with one person that you know is navigating change right now, whether professionally or personally, or maybe just someone you think will enjoy hearing our voices.
Thank you, everybody. We will put a link in the show notes as well for just how you can subscribe to our newsletter. And then, yeah, as Becca said, we will in August be sending out a cheat sheet for you all around how I use AI. And hopefully that will jog some ideas of your own. And I'd love to hear how you use AI as well, because as I mentioned earlier, I am a huge AI nerd. So if there are ways that you're using it that I haven't touched on today, I would love to hear it, because any opportunity I get to see what else is out there, I jump at. So please feel free to reach out to me. As I've said before, you can find me on my website. You can also email me directly at Andrew at rerouteconsulting.com as well, whatever works best for you. Thank you all for tuning in today. This is a bit of a long one, but AI was, it's such a big topic. And so I'm glad to have you all with us, and I hope you found it enjoyable. Until next time, don't be afraid to reroute.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.